The story begins with the heroine recalling her childhood. The forest had been her sanctuary, and she had only one companion, Cider, who treated her like a friend, and was the first to teach her the meaning of goodbye. Despite having reason to resent him, she couldn't bring herself to truly hate him. She awoke abruptly, her body a canvas of wounds and scars, a testament to her precarious situation. A man named Raph sat in a chair, a sneer twisting his lips. As she struggled to sit up, he mocked her for sleeping so soundly amidst her pain. As she sat there, exhausted and trembling, he continued his taunts, bringing up the shame of her mother and questioning her right to any royal blood. Raph's cruelty was on full display as he called her a false princess and mercilessly whipped her, demanding she cry out in agony and beg for mercy. Yet Celeste, her spirit unbroken, endured the torment without yielding. Celeste reflected on the suffering she had endured at the hands of her half-brother, Raph, whose torment had only intensified after he ascended to the throne. As the illegitimate daughter of the previous emperor, she had once found contentment within the palace walls, despite the presence of the Empress and Raph. However, after the deaths of both her mother and father, Raph's brutality had begun. She had tried to fight back, but he merely laughed, eager to witness her complete submission. Raph continued to lash out with the whip, demanding an apology. Celeste, biting back the pain, let out a chilling laugh, questioning what crimes she could possibly have committed while imprisoned. She challenged him to either kill her or strike her again, further fueling his rage. Frustrated, Raph abruptly threw the whip aside and announced a change of plans. He had decided to banish her from the palace after the 3-day banquet, a consequence of her refusal to obey him. However, he cruelly added that, according to imperial law, her ankles must be severed before her exile. Terror gripped Celeste as she desperately pleaded, questioning the need for such a brutal punishment. Departing royalty were typically granted status and wealth, while criminals, it was rumored, had their ankles severed before banishment. Raph coldly informed Celeste that if she were merely a bastard child of low birth, she could have left the palace unscathed. However, as the only princess of the Kaix Empire, her very existence was considered a grave sin. He insisted it wasn't his fault, but the imperial law that dictated her punishment, and told her to blame fate for bringing her to the palace. After 3 days in the dungeon, Celeste was finally released. Weak and barely able to walk, she knew this was the day her ankles would be severed before her banishment, and her mind raced for a solution. Stepping outside, she briefly savored the sunlight before collapsing from exhaustion. While she didn't mind the exile, she desperately sought a way to avoid losing her ankles. A worried maid named Turaga rushed to Celeste's side, concerned to find her lying on the grass and noting her injuries. Celeste reassured her that the beating had been lighter this time. As Turaga tended to her wounds, Celeste contemplated her predicament, confined to a solitary building without allies and unable to defeat Emperor Raph on her own. Suddenly, a servant informed Celeste that she had a visitor. To her surprise, a man she didn't recognize arrived, commenting on the humble surroundings. She immediately sensed his scrutinizing gaze. When he sarcastically addressed her as the false princess, Celeste, irritated, demanded he introduce himself and state his purpose. Then, another man stepped forward, introducing himself as Emperor Betizo of the Kellanith Empire. He explained that Emperor Raph had directed them to this secluded location and apologized for not informing her of their visit in advance. Celeste immediately curtsied, realizing she stood before Emperor Betizo of the powerful Kellanith Empire. She apologized for not recognizing him sooner and for her inability to invite him in. Though flustered by his presence, she admitted to being puzzled by his visit, as no nobleman had ever ventured to her secluded dwelling before. Betizo, dismissing her concerns, stated he had no intention of entering and turned to leave, prompting her maidservant to whisper in awe about his appearance. A curious Celeste inquired whether the Kellanith Empire was truly larger than the Kaix Empire. Betizo's aide, Turkin, confirmed this, adding that it was not only larger, but significantly more powerful, leaving Celeste suspicious of the Emperor's motives. Celeste asked the reason for his visit, and Turkin revealed that Betizo wished for her company at the banquet. A thought sparked in her mind. If Kellanith was more powerful than Kaix, could Betizo be the one to finally defeat Raph? Had he come specifically to see her? Turkin then formally introduced himself as Betizo's attendant. Celeste, noting the brevity of his introduction, inquired if he possessed a title or surname. Turkin simply replied that he did not. Celeste studied Turkin, observing that despite his lack of a title, he didn't seem like a commoner. His graceful demeanor and bearing gave her the impression he might be nobility, perhaps even something more. As Turkin caught her gaze, he turned towards her, causing Celeste to fluster and quickly avert her eyes. However, he continued to stare, making her increasingly uncomfortable. She questioned why he was looking at her that way, wondering if it was because she hadn't seen anyone in so long. As a blush crept up her cheeks, she briefly considered that perhaps it wasn't a misunderstanding. Suddenly, Turkin reached out and brushed something from her hair, deepening her blush. He calmly explained that something had been caught in it. Celeste was momentarily startled. She realized she had almost misinterpreted his gentle gaze. Then, collecting herself, she asked if there was still a place for her to attend with him. Turkin informed her of the banquet at the Kaix palace that evening, surprising her. She admitted she hadn't known, but then recalled Raph mentioning it earlier. Celeste realized her reputation must have spread beyond the Kaix empire, yet she was still taken aback by Turkin's directness when he confirmed his knowledge of her situation. She wondered why Betizo would want her company at the banquet. Something must have changed, she mused. Raph had planned to exile her and sever her ankles, and it seemed unlikely he would have changed his mind so quickly. Turkin informed her that a dress would be delivered for her to wear to the banquet, as her current attire was unsuitable. He instructed her to prepare and assured her he would escort her before the festivities began. Before he departed, Celeste anxiously inquired whether Emperor Raph had approved of this arrangement. However, Turkin firmly replied that he required no one's permission. These were Emperor Betizo's orders. Celeste observed Turkin's demeanor, noting how he had shifted from kind and gentle to cold and commanding. She realized Betizo was far more powerful than Raph and agreed to meet Turkin later, though still uncertain about what exactly was transpiring. Shortly after, a lavish gown arrived, and her maidservant, Traga, excitedly admired it. The dress even included a sheer underskirt to conceal Celeste's scars. Celeste hesitated, feeling the gown might be too extravagant for her, but Traga insisted it would suit her perfectly and offered to help her change. As Traga assisted her, Celeste inquired if she knew anything about Emperor Betizo. Traga shared that he was rumored to be from the Black Wing tribe, a people known for their belligerence and constant expansion of territory. Many feared he might invade Kaix, but due to the vastness of the empire, war had never broken out. Once Celeste was dressed, Traga gasped, declaring her breathtakingly beautiful. However, her admiration quickly turned to sorrow. Touched by Taraga's words, Celeste felt a pang of injustice at the thought of such beauty being isolated and mistreated. Steeling her resolve, she reminded herself not to be swayed by emotion. Her fight was not yet over. Turkin waited outside for Celeste, and after a time, she emerged, clad in a beautiful gown. She asked him if he had been waiting long. Noticing her transformation, Turkin remarked that clothes truly did make the person, and that he was impressed. Flustered, Celeste told him to be honest, and just say she looked passable. But Turkin clarified that the gown suited her perfectly. He then informed her that Emperor Betizo had already gone to the banquet hall. Realizing this was her moment of truth, Celeste hardened her resolve. Whatever the cost, she had to find the answer she sought. Entering the palace, Celeste marveled at its beauty, realizing that due to noble opposition, she had never been allowed inside as a child. Turkin reminded her to maintain a royal demeanor by expressing admiration discreetly and keeping her mouth closed unless speaking or eating. Embarrassed, Celeste admitted her lack of royal upbringing, feeling the sting of being treated as a lesser person. As she walked in, all eyes fell upon her, the nobles whispering amongst themselves, calling her the false princess and expressing surprise that she looked so convincing. Despite her supposed status, Celeste felt suffocated and dizzy under the scrutiny. Turkin curtly instructed her to stand up straight. As she nervously glanced at him, he told her not to look around. Immediately, she faced forward, and they continued walking. He admonished her that royal dignity came from confidence and instructed her to lift the corners of her mouth slightly, rather than maintaining a stiff expression. Just then, Celeste spotted Emperor Raph. Turkin bowed and expressed gratitude for being allowed to attend the banquet, while Celeste curtsied. Raph curtly told Celeste to enjoy the evening. but she noted his serious demeanor and wondered why the host of the banquet seemed so tense. Looking around, she searched for Betrothal and spotted him at the head table. As their eyes met, Betrothal shook his head at her, and she instinctively shook her head back in response. Celeste knew she needed Betrothal's help to escape Kaix, but now, facing him, she hesitated, unsure of her next move. Turkin whispered in her ear, urging her to ask Emperor Betrothal to marry her. Shocked, Celeste stared at him in disbelief. Turkin insisted it was her only way out of Kaix. She was overwhelmed by his seeming ability to understand her innermost thoughts. When she asked what would happen if Betrothal refused, Turkin told her to give him an offer he couldn't refuse. Unsure how to respond, Celeste realized she had to attempt the proposal. She wondered why Turkin was suddenly urging her to do this, but decided to focus on the bigger picture. As she approached Betrothal, she strategized. Her only chance of survival was to become the Empress of Kellanith. She needed to figure out what Betrothal truly desired. Considering his powerful empire, his ever-expanding Black-Wing territories, and Raph's reluctant expression throughout the banquet, she concluded that Betothal's true objective was the Kaix Empire itself. Celeste reached Betothal's table, and he invited her to sit and talk. She curtsied and thanked him, then noted the empty guest seat beside him, which gave her the impression that Betrothal was treating this banquet as a strategic invasion. Despite trembling with nerves, Celeste gathered her courage, clenched her fists, and boldly proposed, "Your Majesty, Betrothal, please marry me." Betrothal raised an eyebrow at the sudden proposal, amused by the abrupt turn in the conversation. He studied her intently, then commented that her approach was rather unexpected. With steely determination, Celeste declared that if he married her, she would offer him Kaix itself. Betrothal scoffed at the offer. He chuckled at her words. When she asked if he didn't want Kaix, Betrothal confidently replied that she didn't seem to understand the kind of man he was. He didn't need to marry a princess to possess Kaix. He could simply negotiate with Kaix's emperor and take it himself. Celeste challenged this, pointing out that no emperor would simply relinquish their empire after a single conversation. He'd get a piece of land at most. She argued that while war was an option, even for the victor, it would require a significant investment of time, money, and lives. Therefore, she proposed to help Kellanith take Kaix without bloodshed. Betrothal found this amusing, commenting that she must not value her own country. Celeste retorted, reminding him that he was already aware of her predicament. If he were in her shoes, would he still cherish Kaix? Betrothal silently poured her a glass of wine, then warned her that betraying one's country was never the right path. Celeste scoffed, taking a sip of the wine, sarcastically remarking that she hadn't taken him for a man of such high moral standing. Betrothal chuckled at her boldness, then pointed out that she lacked the authority to make such a proposal. Celeste replied that he could give her that authority. Betrothal, realizing her intent, deduced that she wanted to become the Empress of Kellanith. He hesitated, however, saying she was too young and it would be tiresome to teach her everything a wife needed to know. Celeste firmly stated she could learn anything. Betrothal raised a skeptical eyebrow, but Celeste, acutely aware of how absurd her proposal sounded, silently pleaded for a chance to prove herself. Betrothal offered his wine glass, telling Celeste she must keep her word. A mixture of surprise and relief washed over Celeste, and she confidently agreed. The deal was struck. Turkin, watching the scene unfold from afar, wore a knowing smirk. Leaving the banquet hall, Celeste finally released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The weight of what had just transpired pressed down on her. However, a sharp pain quickly followed. Her heels were rubbed raw, her feet swollen from the constricting shoes. She kicked off the heels and sank onto a bench, sighing in relief. Suddenly, Turkin appeared, startling her. Celeste yelped in frustration, telling him to make some noise when he approached. Turkin calmly replied that he had, but she had been too distracted to notice. He then asked if she was all right, and Celeste downplayed her pain. Needing answers, Celeste asked if Betrothal had known about her proposal beforehand. Turkin confirmed this, but revealed that Betrothal hadn't expected her to offer Kaix itself. This meant the outcome of the proposal could have changed depending on her approach. A wave of unease washed over Celeste as she realized Betrothal had been testing her. She then questioned Turkin if everything from Betothal's visit to her proposal had been part of his plan. Turkin, with a sly smile, simply replied, "A part." Celeste now glared at Turkin, a flicker of anger in her eyes. The suspicion that he had orchestrated her offering of Kaix in her proposal began to fester, leaving her feeling unsettled, a mere pawn in their grand scheme. Agitated, she asked Turkin to give her some space to rest, suggesting he should rest as well. However, noticing her swollen feet, Turkin suddenly knelt down and began massaging them. Celeste yelped again, this time in shock and embarrassment, demanding to know what he was doing. Turkin apologized, admitting he knew it was her first time wearing heels, but hadn't anticipated this much pain. Celeste frantically insisted he stop, nervously glancing around to make sure no one was watching. Turkin, continuing to massage her feet, calmly told her to stay still, saying it was his duty to take care of her as her servant. Celeste, now even more embarrassed, questioned if he did this for everyone he served, worried about what others might think. Turkin reassured her with a smile, mentioning that this area wasn't frequented by others. Despite her flustered state, Celeste found the massage incredibly soothing and ceased her protests. Just then, a couple strolled by, laughing and taking in the secluded spot. Celeste panicked, realizing they might be seen. She whispered to Turkin, asking what they should do. Without hesitation, Turkin guided her behind a nearby tree. Turkin pulled Celeste behind the tree, shielding her from the couple's view. However, to Celeste's intense embarrassment, the couple suddenly became intimate. Her face flushed crimson, and she quickly turned away. She wished she could escape the situation and the sounds that accompanied it. Sensing her discomfort, Turkin gently stroked her hair. He tried to comfort her. Celeste, flustered, wondered why he was doing this, why he always seemed to confuse her. She noticed his red eyes up close for the first time, admiring their ruby hue. Lost in thought, she realized her heart was racing, adding to her nervousness. Turkin then informed her that the couple had left. Celeste, startled from her reverie, quickly composed herself. She wondered if Turkin was only being courteous because she was his superior. Trying to decipher his true intentions, Celeste stretched her legs and smoothed her dress, relieved to finally be able to move. Turkin noticed and asked if her legs were hurting. She assured him she just needed to walk around a bit. Watching her brush off her skirt, he commented that such actions were unbecoming of royalty. Celeste hesitated, unsure of how royalty was supposed to act. Turkin extended his hand, saying it was getting late and they should leave, though uncertain whether to trust him. Celeste took his hand, realizing he was the only one she could rely on at the moment. As they walked, Turkin mentioned that discussions of their marriage would begin after the banquet, surprising Celeste with the speed of it all. Meanwhile, Raph and Betizo were discussing the urgency of the wedding. Raph questioned the rush, but Betizo insisted there was no reason to delay, as it was the first union between Kellanith and Kaix. Raph listened with surprise as Betizo inquired whether Celeste was unhappy with the arrangement. Celeste clarified that she was merely caught off guard by how sudden everything was. Raph then informed them that the wedding would take place in Kellanith, and the Kaix royalty would only send a delegation, not attend themselves. Betizo found it strange that the emperor wouldn't attend his own daughter's wedding, but ultimately accepted it as their tradition. Raph, with a look of regret, explained that he would have liked to celebrate the occasion properly, but due to Celeste's supposedly humble origins, he couldn't. Betizo simply acknowledged this, but something in his tone unsettled Raph. He flinched under Betizo's gaze before attempting to regain his composure, ordering a servant to bring fresh tea. Visibly upset, Raph presented a rare tea from the Garza royalty. Garza, a distant land, had been a mighty Hillith magical empire a century ago before its downfall. He explained that the Hillith people were renowned for their exceptional tea-making skills, and now only a few remained, making this tea a rarity. He offered the tea to Celeste and Betizo, mentioning the effort taken to acquire it. Curious about its value, Celeste took a sip, only to find it underwhelming, tasting like ordinary grass. Betizo didn't touch his cup, stating he only consumed food and drink from his homeland. His refusal, ostensibly for safety reasons, momentarily offended Raph, but he suppressed his anger, praising Betizo's prudence. Celeste watched silently, taking a certain pleasure in Raph's inability to retort, reassured that despite the political nature of her marriage, she had made a decent choice. Later, Celeste and her maid, Toriega, were packing for the journey to Kellanith. Celeste asked Toriega if she would accompany her. With unwavering loyalty, Toriega replied that she would never let the princess go to a foreign land alone. She declared that after all these years together, even in death, she wanted to remain by Celeste's side. Touched by her devotion, Celeste thanked her silently. Celeste, remembering Toriega's unwavering support during her darkest hours, found herself preparing for the journey to Kellanith with her loyal maid. Their packing was abruptly interrupted by a drunken Raph, who stumbled into the room, startling them both. Raph, with a sneer, remarked on Celeste's supposed eagerness to leave, questioning how she had managed to bewitch the Emperor of Kellanith. Celeste, recognizing his inebriated state, replied that she had done nothing special, suggesting it must simply be a matter of preference. Raph scoffed, disparaging her appearance and claiming she was no match for the women of Kellanith, then cruelly insulted her mother, insinuating infidelity and questioning Celeste's royal lineage. Infuriated, Celeste ordered him to leave, but Raph only grew more aggressive, mocking her haughtiness and warning that the Kellanith nobility would never accept a commoner like her, regardless of her title. Distressed, Celeste cried out that she didn't care where she went as long as she never had to see his face again. Feeling insulted, Raph's drunken rage turned on Toriega, whom he accused of blindly serving a false princess. Toriega cried out in pain as Raph lashed out. Horrified, Celeste rushed to protect her maid. Despite Celeste's pleas for him to stop, Raph continued his brutal assault, kicking them both while ranting that even if the mistress was foolish, the servant should at least have some sense. Celeste endured the blows, telling herself to bear it just this last time. Meanwhile, Toriega, weeping, desperately begged him to spare Celeste, taking the blame upon herself and pleading for her own punishment. Raph continued his vicious attack. Batizo and Turkin arrived on the scene. Batizo immediately confronted Raph, his sharp gaze filled with disapproval. "What in the world are you doing, Raph?" he demanded. Startled by Batizo's presence, Raph faltered, visibly flustered, and stammered, trying to regain his composure. He quickly asked Batizo why he was there, attempting to deflect attention from the situation at hand. Unmoved, Batizo coldly replied that he hadn't expected to witness such an unseemly spectacle. Realizing he had been caught red-handed, Raph attempted to cover his actions with a strained smile. He hastily claimed it was all a misunderstanding, awkwardly chuckling as he explained that he had merely intended to speak with Celeste, but had become emotional when she mentioned leaving. He then shifted the blame onto Toriega, accusing her of unnecessary interference. He further justified his actions by claiming he was merely disciplining Celeste, and that Toriega, out of loyalty to her mistress, had complicated matters. However, Batizo remained impassive, his sharp gaze fixed on Raph. "Excuses are rarely this elaborate," he stated coldly. His words cut through the air like a knife, causing Raph to flinch. Realizing his lies were ineffective, Raph quickly attempted to apologize, desperately pleading with Batizo not to misunderstand the situation. Batizo, still unmoved, gave a knowing smirk and replied in an icy tone, "This is what it is. What is there for me to misunderstand? However, I do understand that the Kaix royalty, known for their high standards, have their own methods of disciplining their subordinates." As Batizo stepped closer, his powerful presence caused Raph to tremble, his body betraying the fear he tried to conceal. He realized that his lies, excuses, and authority held no weight against Batizo. Batizo firmly told Raph that if he was finished, he should leave, as he had matters to discuss with his bride. Raph, realizing he had no choice, quickly agreed, feigning a veneer of politeness before departing, sarcastically wishing Celeste pleasant dreams. Celeste watched him go, astonished by the stark contrast in his demeanor. Only moments before, he had been violent and arrogant, yet in Batizo's presence, he was unexpectedly submissive. She had never imagined him behaving so meekly. Turning to Batizo, Celeste expressed her gratitude. Batizo, maintaining his composure, inquired after her well-being after such an ordeal. Celeste assured him that thanks to his intervention, she was fine. He then addressed their travel plans, informing her that they would be departing the following morning. When Celeste inquired about the journey, Batizo explained that it would take 15 days of continuous travel. However, their actual plan was to travel by carriage for 7 to 10 days, leaving the remaining arrangements to Turkin. He warned her that even if she experienced pain, she would have to endure the journey. Celeste understood this wasn't a negotiation, but a firm directive. She doubted her current condition could withstand 10 days of travel, but knew she had no say in the matter. Concluding the conversation, Batizo instructed Turkin to leave with him. Celeste sensed a subtle disdain from Batizo, despite his polite demeanor. However, given their relationship was built on a contract, she knew she couldn't expect more. The following morning, as Celeste prepared to depart with her luggage, Turkin informed her the carriage was ready. Toriega offered to help carry her belongings, but Celeste assured her it wouldn't take long as she didn't have much. Turkin, without hesitation, took the luggage from Celeste's hands, a gesture that surprised her. She murmured a quiet thank you. Turkin reminded her that royalty shouldn't thank their subordinates, as they were merely performing their duties. Noticing Celeste holding a small package, Turkin silently took it from her and carried it himself. Celeste instinctively wanted to refuse, but Turkin dismissed her concerns, stating that carrying her belongings was also part of his job. When she again attempted to thank him, he gave her a stern look. It made her recoil, realizing that such open displays of gratitude weren't the royal way. Their journey commenced, Celeste sitting in the carriage, pondering the rigid customs of royalty. She couldn't understand why even the freedom to express admiration or gratitude had to be so carefully measured. Many aspects of royal life remained unfamiliar to her. Before leaving Kaix, she had a final formal meeting with the royal nobles and Raf. The gathering had been filled with the false pleasantries of the white-winged empire, and Raf's farewell had been nothing short of a mockery. In a flashback, Raf offered Celeste a false smile, sarcastically whispering good health to her, and mockingly telling her to survive in Kellanith. Celeste, stung by his words, silently vowed to survive. Just as he'd said, she was determined to one day return to Kaix and uncover the truth behind her mother's death. Until then, she thought to Raf, good health to you too. Back in the present, Celeste realized 12 days had passed since she'd left Cali. As the carriage stopped for a break, Celeste sat beneath a tree to eat. Toriega urged her to eat well, expressing concern for her wounds from the journey. Celeste reassured her that she was managing, aided by medication. Just then, Batizo approached, commenting that Celeste appeared stronger than she looked. A surprised Celeste greeted him, and he questioned whether medication alone was enough to sustain her. She confidently replied that she was resilient and coping well. Inwardly, she felt a flicker of relief at seeing him again after several days. Batizo informed her that if they continued for 3 more days, they should reach Kellanith comfortably. When Celeste questioned what he meant by comfortably, he reminded her, as he'd mentioned before, that Turkin would handle the journey. He then revealed that Turkin was a chronomage, explaining that if their party were smaller or the distance shorter, they could have teleported directly from Kaix to Kellanith. A curious Celeste asked what chronomage was. Batizo, noting her ignorance, commented that she must not have received proper princess training. He then stated she had much to learn before her departure. Celeste bowed and acknowledged she would learn, but inwardly she found Batizo cold and unfeeling, and doubted they would ever become close. With that, their journey resumed. As the weariness of travel settled upon her, Celeste realized they had been traveling for roughly 10 days. Her pain medication and salves were running low, and she felt her strength waning. Suddenly, the order came to halt. Celeste, puzzled, wondered if they had arrived, but Turkin stepped forward, announcing his intention to utilize his chronomancy. As he began to chant, Celeste watched with curiosity, realizing he was about to cast a spell. Toriega yawned, relieved they were finally resorting to chronomancy. When Celeste asked if she had witnessed it before, Toriega admitted she hadn't. She had never even seen a chronomancer in person. She commented on the exorbitant cost of hiring one, expressing her awe at the sheer power of the Kellanith Empire. As Turkin's magic activated, a blinding light engulfed them. Everyone, including Celeste, instinctively closed their eyes. When she opened them again, she found herself standing outside the Kellanith Imperial Palace, stunned. Both Celeste and Toriega were awestruck by the grandeur of the empire. A wave of emotion washed over Celeste as she admitted that while she had heard tales of Kellanith's magnificence, seeing it firsthand surpassed all expectations. Turkin then opened the carriage door, instructing Celeste to disembark and stand beside Betrothal as the nobles were present. Celeste, feeling a surge of nervousness, hesitated. She realized that as the future empress of an empire far larger than Kaix, she would be under intense scrutiny. She knew the nobles would be aware of the rumors surrounding her past, and their judgment would be harsh. The anxiety she now felt was even more intense than what she had experienced at the banquet. Seeing Celeste trembling, Turkin reassured her, telling her not to be so nervous and to simply think of it as being in a place with colder weather compared to Kaix. Stealing her resolve, Celeste reminded herself that unlike Raph, no one here would strike her. She gathered her courage and stood firmly beside Betrothal. Turkin formally announced her arrival, introducing her as the future Empress of Kellanith. Celeste, determined not to falter, reminded herself that this was just the beginning. A maid then guided Celeste to her chambers, explaining that this would be her temporary residence until the wedding. She also informed her that the bath would be prepared shortly. Upon seeing the room, Celeste, despite her efforts to remain composed, was astonished by its magnificence. She wondered how much larger the master bedroom would be after the wedding. Soon, the maids informed her that the bath was ready and that the emperor had invited her to dinner. Despite her exhaustion, Celeste knew she couldn't refuse. As she bathed, the maids assisting her noticed the whip marks on her back and appeared deeply concerned. Although Celeste insisted she was fine, she understood their shock at seeing a princess in such a state. One maid offered to wash her arms, while another hesitantly applied salve. Celeste almost thanked them out of habit, but stopped herself. Despite her weariness, she looked forward to dinner, hoping for a proper conversation with Betrothal. Celeste waited in the dining hall for Betrothal, wondering why he was taking so long. When the door finally opened, she expected to see him, but instead, it was Turkin who entered. Turkin apologized, explaining that Betrothal had been called away on urgent business and that she should begin her meal without him. When Celeste questioned why Turkin was joining her, he explained that he couldn't allow her to have her first meal in Kellanith alone. Though disappointed at missing the chance to speak with Betrothal, Celeste agreed that having company was better than dining alone. As the food was served, Celeste marveled at the lavish spread. However, as she picked up her cutlery, she hesitated, unsure of how to use them. Noticing her predicament, Turkin asked if something was wrong. She hesitantly admitted that she didn't know how to use them. Turkin reassured her and demonstrated the proper way to hold them. When Celeste still struggled, he rose and gently guided her hands, helping her grasp the correct grip. Touched by his kindness, she followed his instructions. Turkin encouraged her to relax her grip and practice, assuring her that she would learn quickly. He curiously asked her if she had never used a knife and fork before. Celeste explained that she had only ever used a spoon, as she rarely ate meat, and even when she did, it was always pre-cut. During the meal, Turkin was shocked to learn of Celeste's lack of experience with decent fruit and fine dining. He angrily cursed Raph, calling him a bastard. Celeste flinched in surprise, having never heard anyone insult Raph before. When Turkin asked if he had offended her, she reassured him that hearing someone speak against Raph was actually refreshing. As they continued their meal, Celeste's hands trembled slightly around the unfamiliar cutlery. Noticing her discomfort, Turkin offered to excuse himself, implying she could eat with her hands if she preferred. Celeste insisted he needn't leave on her account, but he explained that he simply wanted her to be comfortable. If his presence made her uneasy, he understood and would take his leave just for today. With a polite bow, he departed. The moment he was gone, Celeste finally set down the knife and fork, no longer concerned with etiquette, and enjoyed the delicious food with her hands. She wondered if her mother had ever had the chance to taste such food back in Kaix. After the meal, Turkin advised Celeste to maintain a respectful and dignified demeanor with the palace servants, rather than becoming overly familiar. Celeste found this difficult, but acknowledged it as a challenge. Suddenly, she began to experience stomach pains and dizziness, likely from eating too quickly. Struggling to respond, she quickly rose and rushed to the sink, vomiting. Turkin, alarmed, followed her, calling out in concern. Celeste began to lose consciousness, But before she could collapse, Turkin caught her. She heard him say something, but it all faded into a blur as she fainted. The next morning, Celeste awoke in her bedroom, realizing she must have been unconscious for an entire day. She rang for a maid and requested water. When she inquired about Emperor Betizo, the maid informed her that he had eaten breakfast early and gone to his office. Disappointed that they had missed their intended meal together, Celeste requested a light breakfast, and the maid left to prepare it. When the maid returned with Celeste's light breakfast, she was surprised by the large quantity of food and inquired if the rest would be thrown away. The maid explained that any untouched food would be eaten by the servants and not wasted. Celeste insisted on keeping only the bun and soup, requesting the maid take the rest for herself, as she may have inadvertently touched them. However, the maid hesitated, explaining that the kitchen would be reprimanded if too much untouched food was returned. This frustrated Celeste, reminding her of the burdens of being a princess. Later, Turkin visited her with tea, asking if she was feeling better. Celeste thanked him for his help the previous day, but he brushed it off as nothing. As she sipped the tea, she noted that it tasted slightly different from the tea Raf had served Betizo. Turkin explained that it was the same tea, but the taste varied depending on who brewed it. Celeste found this tea more palatable and complimented the Kellanith maids on their superior tea-making skills compared to Raf servants. To her astonishment, Turkin revealed that he had brewed the tea himself, explaining that the Hillith people were the true experts in this art. Celeste recalled Raf mentioning the Hillith, who inherited elven blood and were renowned for their exceptional tea brewing. Their empire had been destroyed by Garza 100 years ago, and now only a few retained their unique abilities. Turkin complimented her memory, asking if she had made a conscious effort to remember. Celeste clarified that she hadn't intentionally memorized it. Curious, she asked if he was truly Hillith. Turkin sensed her curiosity about why a Hillith would be serving Betizo in Kellanith. He explained that 5 years ago, he had saved Betizo from a perilous situation on the battlefield. Celeste was surprised to hear he had saved the Emperor, but Turkin hinted that his abilities were beyond what she could imagine. Then Turkin informed Celeste of a problem. The nobles were vehemently opposed to the marriage. Therefore, an immediate wedding was difficult to arrange. Celeste felt a pang of distress, realizing the opposition stemmed from her. Turkin asked for her understanding. While she acknowledged their position, she was determined not to yield. She recalled the nobles of Kaix criticizing her for diminishing Raf's prestige, and realized the situation in Kellanith wouldn't be any different. Turkin asked if she was nervous, and she admitted she couldn't help it, being nothing more than a false princess from Kaix. He reassured her that while the wedding might take time, Betizo was a man of his word. Celeste accepted this, but a sudden thought struck her. She asked Turkin what he had said while she was unconscious. He replied with a smile that he had only called her princess, though Celeste felt he had said more. Later that evening, Celeste dined with Betizo. She had anticipated this meeting, but now that they were together, the silence felt awkward. She wondered if he disliked her company, as he hadn't spoken a word. Finally, Betizo broke the silence, asking if she remembered saying she could learn anything. Caught off guard, Celeste hesitated before confirming, then inquired why he brought it up. He explained that the nobles strongly opposed their marriage, but had agreed on one condition. Celeste must undergo Empress education. When she asked what that entailed, Betizo listed subjects such as Kellanith history, politics, geography, economics, and royal etiquette. Then, with a smile that puzzled Celeste, he added that this was merely the beginning. There was much more to learn. Celeste resolved that if Empress education was the price of marriage, she would do it, reminding Betizo that he, too, must keep his promise. Betizo assured her he would, and informed her a tutor would be assigned the following day. As they ate, Celeste felt a familiar awkwardness, realizing that even dining with Turkin hadn't been this uncomfortable. The silence unsettled her. Noticing she'd barely touched her food, Betizo inquired if it was to her liking. Acknowledging his attentiveness, Celeste explained she had overeaten the previous day, resulting in her illness. When Betizo asked if she needed anything, Celeste hesitantly requested permission to explore the palace. Betizo granted it, telling her she could ask Turkin without needing his consent. Celeste thanked him, a lightness entering her voice. Betizo commented on how her previously somber face had brightened. Celeste flushed, realizing she'd forgotten Turkin's advice about maintaining a dignified composure. As their conversation concluded, Betizo rose, telling Celeste he would be occupied for a while. instructing her to focus on her training with Turkin. Without a good night, or even a simple farewell, he departed, leaving Celeste to sigh in disappointment. The next day, Celeste was surprised to learn Turkin was her assigned tutor. He declared confidently that few tutors were better than him, a statement that inwardly disappointed Celeste. He informed her she had a year to master all the subjects and mentioned another tutor would be joining them. Just as Celeste inquired about the second tutor, a woman rushed in, apologizing for her tardiness, explaining that an unforeseen issue had delayed her. Celeste reassured her it was all right, noting the woman's unusually short hair for a noble woman. Celeste listened as Turkin introduced her as Lady Elisabetta Guido, daughter of Count Guido. Elisabetta curtsied, apologizing to Celeste again, who greeted her warmly and inquired if everything had been resolved. However, both Turkin and Elisabetta stared at Celeste, leaving her flustered and wondering if she had asked something inappropriate. Elisabetta assured her it would be handled soon and thanked her for her concern. To change the subject, Celeste hesitantly complimented Elisabetta's short hair. Elisabetta exclaimed in delight, saying Celeste was the first to do so. Celeste's genuine compliment on her beauty further delighted Elisabetta. She excitedly declared that no one ever appreciated her liberating hairstyle, much to her disappointment, but now that the princess approved, she was sure it would become a trend. Turkin dryly commented that liberation was often a symbol of rebellion, which irritated Elisabetta, causing her to snap at him. Celeste thought to herself that despite the rumors of Elisabetta's poor reputation amongst the Kellanith nobility, it was surprising how friendly she was being. She felt both pleased and embarrassed by the attention. Curious, she asked what subject Elisabetta would be teaching, but Turkin clarified that Elisabetta was there as a lady-in-waiting, not a tutor. Elisabetta offered to serve tea, and Celeste, smiling, allowed her to proceed. As they sipped their tea, Celeste remarked that Elisabetta must be close to Turkin. Elisabetta immediately recoiled and denied it, saying she barely knew him, but considered him an unfortunate man. Celeste found it odd for a noble woman to speak that way. However, Elisabetta admitted that despite this, Turkin was someone trustworthy in a world full of lies. This gave Celeste pause. Turkin was the person she had interacted with the most since arriving in Kellanith. Yet she knew very little about him, other than that he was Halithian and a sorcerer. Intrigued, she asked Elisabetta if Turkin was truly trustworthy. Elisabetta described Turkin as someone who offered advice and spoke his mind regardless of social standing, which made him annoying, but also part of his charm. She added that many women in Kellanith found this trait attractive. Celeste, surprised, asked if that meant he was popular. Elisabetta confirmed this, explaining that Turkin was handsome, of noble birth, though without a title, and along with the emperor, was one of the most sought-after men in Kellanith's social circles. Celeste then inquired about Emperor Batizo's character. Elisabetta hesitated, then admitted that, based on his appearance and demeanor, he was more frightening than he seemed. Realizing she might have spoken too freely, she quickly congratulated Celeste, reminding her that the emperor, desired by many, now belonged to her. Celeste mulled over Elisabetta's words, unsure if she entirely believed her. She already knew Batizo was a formidable figure, but she had yet to understand his true nature. Later, Celeste and Turkin discussed a unique characteristic of the Kellanith and Kaix people, their wings. Turkin explained that these two royal bloodlines were the only humans who possessed wings. Originally, all Kellanith and Kaix people had wings, but centuries of intermarriage with foreigners had reduced this trait to the royal families alone. The wings could be concealed or revealed at will, and their color always matched the person's hair color. Celeste realized this was why Raph had white hair. Turkin continued, explaining that royal children weren't born with fully formed wings. Until the age of 12, only traces of wings appeared on their backs. Once fully developed, the wings required meticulous care. Though rare, there were cases where the wing color differed from the hair color. Celeste recalled her time in the Kaix palace, remembering the royal family's particular interest in her when she turned 12. However, her wings had never shown any sign of growth. Raph had always accused her of not being the deceased emperor's biological child, and she had assumed it was due to her mother's background. Now, she realized her lineage was indeed questionable. If she wasn't the emperor's daughter, why had her mother followed him? Her mother's choices had been entirely for her, believing she possessed royal blood. But then why was she blonde and wingless? Turkin, noticing her pensive state, asked if she was all right. She brushed it off and, complimenting his historical knowledge, asked if there was anything he couldn't do. Turkin humbly replied that while there wasn't anything he couldn't do, there were many things he was not good at. When Celeste asked about the difference between couldn't and not good at, he told her that in time, she would come to understand, but if she ever found fault with him later, he hoped she wouldn't hate him. Celeste reassured him that she had no reason to hate him. In fact, he had saved her life, and if it weren't for him, she would have been long dead. Feeling a need for fresh air after their conversation, she decided to step outside. Just as she was about to leave, Turkin stopped her, draping his cloak over her shoulders and reminding her of the chill in the air. Celeste was taken aback by Turkin's attentiveness, but he casually remarked that he had always looked after her. Unbeknownst to them, Betizo witnessed their intimate exchange, then quietly slipped away. Later, Turkin informed Betizo that the Cronin Empire had sent yet another marriage proposal. Already agitated, Betizo dismissed it without a glance, complaining that despite repeated rejections, the princess persisted in her declarations of love, making him wonder if she lacked self-respect. Turkin suggested that, now that Celeste's presence was public knowledge, the Cronin princess might finally give up. However, Betizo remained doubtful, fearing she would cling to hope until he was officially married. To solidify Celeste's position, Turkin proposed holding a grand ball, inviting the nobility of neighboring kingdoms, including Kaix. Betizo agreed, instructing him to send out the invitations the following day, curious to see if the Cronin princess would attend. When Turkin reminded him of his earlier intention to have a drink, Betizo admitted his insomnia had returned. Turkin reassured him that, once he unified the continent through his union with Celeste and Kaix, his dream would soon be realized, and urged him to remain calm. Betizo questioned whether unifying the continent through Kaix was truly possible. Turkin insisted that even if Betizo didn't trust Celeste, he should trust him, for he had received a prophecy concerning her. Betizo conceded, admitting that without Turkin, he wouldn't even have considered marrying Celeste. Shifting the subject, Betizo confessed his struggles with sleeplessness, saying even medication was useless, and pleaded for Turkin's help. Turkin cautioned him against relying too heavily on his magical tea. Betizo then inquired whether Turkin had visited the temple to pray. Turkin explained that he had been too busy, so the priest had been praying in his stead. Betizo reminded him to be careful not to neglect prayers for himself and his deceased father. He then revealed that his father often appeared in his dreams. Recalling his painful past, Betizo shared that his father, driven mad by a prophecy that his son would one day devour him, had constantly abused him, leaving him not a single day without injury. The sight of Celeste's scars from past beatings troubled him, as it served as a stark reminder of his own suffering. Celeste's tutor commended her for keeping up with the lessons remarkably well despite their difficulty, making teaching a pleasure. Initially, Celeste had found the lessons challenging, but with time, she gained confidence and began to enjoy learning. Her afternoon tea sessions with Elisabetta helped alleviate the stress, and in the evenings, Turkin always joined her for dinner. During one such dinner, Celeste expressed her gratitude to Turkin, saying that thanks to him, she no longer felt lonely during meals. Turkin began to explain that there was a purpose behind their shared meals, but Celeste interrupted him, acknowledging that it was to review her lessons. However, she remained grateful for his company. As they ate, Turkin asked if she needed anything. Celeste reflected on her past in Kaix, where her sole focus had been survival. She had once believed that simply living a normal life would be enough, but now, despite enjoying many new experiences, she found her desires increasing. She wondered if she was becoming greedy. Turkin urged her to voice her needs. Celeste told Turkin she needed some money, not a large amount, as she wanted to buy a gift and also wished to venture outside the palace walls. Turkin reassured her that money was a necessity and she wasn't being greedy. He explained that he had already planned to allocate a budget for her, but recent events had caused a delay. He also told her that while she could go out, she would have to be accompanied by him and a guard named Eli, a condition to which Celeste cheerfully agreed a little later. Celeste and Turkin rode in a carriage towards the market, her gaze flitting excitedly through the window, eager to find a meaningful gift. Leaving Elisabetta and Toriga behind, Turkin instructed the coachman to stop when they reached a jewelry shop, mentioning it was the most renowned jeweler in all of Kellanith. Inside, the shopkeeper greeted Turkin warmly, remarking that it had been a while since his last visit. Turkin introduced introduced Celeste as the Princess of Kaix and future Empress of Kellanith, instructing the shopkeeper to treat her with the utmost respect. The shopkeeper, deeply honored by her presence, invited her to peruse the newly arrived Garza diamonds. While tea was being prepared, Celeste browsed the jewelry, admiring the beauty of the Garza diamonds, but feeling a slight unease at the name, as it reminded her of Turkin. He, however, seemed not to mind. The shopkeeper presented the finest pieces, from which Celeste selected a hairpin and a necklace, hoping the recipient would appreciate them. Turkin remarked that while her choices were good, there was always a chance they might not be to the other person's taste. Celeste felt a sense of relief and continued to admire the glittering displays, captivated by their beauty. Suddenly, she heard the sound of a child crying outside, and through the shop window, she saw a mother comforting her child. The scene brought her own mother to mind, who, despite their humble circumstances, had always put Celeste first. A wave of emotion washed over Celeste as she recalled the day her mother died, and she renewed her resolve to return to Kaix and uncover the truth behind her mother's passing. As she continued to browse, a particular ring caught her eye. It bore a hefty price tag. He confirmed that Louise's jewelry was generally expensive. The shopkeeper offered her a special discount, but after a moment of contemplation, Celeste decided against the purchase. Celeste presented a piece of jewelry to Toriga, who was both shocked and overwhelmed by the gesture, initially hesitant to accept such a lavish gift. Toriga insisted she hadn't done anything to deserve such a present, but Celeste reminded her of the numerous times Toriga had cared for her, even sharing her food when Celeste had nothing. Tears welled up in Toriga's eyes as she embraced Celeste tightly, reflecting on how much she, Celeste, had grown. Seeing Toriga's happiness brought a genuine smile to Celeste's face. Toriga then informed her that Emperor Betizo had requested her presence for dinner. Celeste felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect of the meeting, wondering if she should change her clothes. Toriga reassured her that she looked presentable enough. However, Celeste was momentarily puzzled by her own thoughts, unsure why the idea of changing had even crossed her mind. Celeste waited for Betizo in the dining hall alone, feeling a knot of anticipation in her stomach, wondering if she had arrived too early. When Betizo entered, she offered a formal curtsy, which he waved away, telling her there was no need for such formality. During the meal, Betizo mentioned her earlier outing and encouraged her to venture out more often if she wished, telling her she could always ask Turkin for money. Celeste was surprised by this unexpected thoughtfulness, as she hadn't pegged him as someone who would show such concern. Betizo then instructed a servant to present Celeste with a gift. She opened the box with a puzzled expression, then gasped in astonishment to find the very ring she had admired at Louise's jewelry shop nestled inside. When he asked if she liked it, Celeste expressed her delight, but hesitantly mentioned its high price. Betizo chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound, reassuring her that he could certainly afford a small ring. Celeste felt a blush creep up her cheeks, flustered by her own words. She gazed at the ring, a smile playing on her lips, her heart beating a little faster, though she wasn't quite sure why. After giving the ring to Celeste, Betizo questioned himself whether it had been truly necessary. Turkin reassured him that Celeste loved it, even becoming a little shy. Betizo wondered if this would make her develop feelings for him. Turkin responded that strengthening their bond would help prevent her from changing her mind later. Annoyed, Betizo expressed his dislike for dealing with such matters. But Turkin reminded him that he could handle things however he pleased, despite Betizo trying to convince himself that Celeste was merely a tool to control Kaix. Later, Celeste gifted Elisabetta a hairpin, explaining that she had put a lot of thought into choosing it. Betizo, meanwhile, found himself increasingly concerned about her. Elisabetta, though accustomed to expensive gifts as a noble, was overjoyed and treasured the thoughtful present. She thanked Celeste excitedly. In return, she offered Celeste a small, handcrafted hair clip. Touched by the beautiful gift, Celeste expressed her gratitude, a deep sense of happiness flowing between them during the exchange. Elisabetta then placed the clip in Celeste's hair and admired how perfectly it suited her, predicting that Celeste would be the most beautiful lady at the upcoming ball. However, Celeste expressed her apprehension about attending the ball, unfamiliar as she was with Kellanith's social scene, having lived a secluded life in Kaix. Elisabetta explained that, like most social gatherings, the ball was primarily an event for nobles to seek potential partners. Celeste was flustered when Elisabetta bluntly referred to it as a mating party. Elisabetta quickly corrected herself, clarifying that while romance was the main focus, not everyone attended for that reason. Celeste then inquired whether Elisabetta frequented such events. Elisabetta revealed that her family constantly urged her to attend. However, she passionately declared her refusal to join what she called the mating grounds, determined to find true love rather than participate in superficial matchmaking. Celeste, taken aback by Elisabetta's mating grounds terminology, asked where one could find true love. Elisabetta believed soulmates appeared naturally, not through arranged marriages. She confided that she once thought she had found hers, but ultimately broke off the engagement after her fiancé fell in love with another woman. Celeste realized this might be the reason Elisabetta had seemed so despondent. However, Elisabetta excitedly declared that Celeste and Emperor Batizo seemed destined to be together, pointing out that there were once rumors Batizo would never marry, yet he had fallen for Celeste at first sight. If that wasn't fate, what was? Celeste pondered the idea of destiny. Recalling the ring Batizo had given her, she wondered if she was reading too much into a simple gift, but despite this, she couldn't ignore the quickening of her heart every time she thought about it. With Turkin, Celeste practiced dancing for the upcoming ball. As musicians played, Turkin guided her steps, instructing her to lift her left foot back and move rhythmically. However, despite her best efforts, Celeste struggled to keep up smoothly. Noticing her tension, Turkin warned her that the pressure would be even greater at the actual ball, and people might laugh if she didn't improve. A frustrated Celeste suggested cutting back on other lessons to focus entirely on dancing, but Turkin reminded her that over-practicing would leave her too sore to dance properly on the day of the event. Despite her discouragement, Celeste was determined to improve and insisted on trying again. As they continued to practice, she realized that while studying had always been a matter of time and effort for her, dancing was different. Her body refused to cooperate the way her mind did. Celeste continued practicing her dancing with Turkin, gradually improving, but still struggling with her posture. Turkin pointed out that she leaned back too much, reminding her that this had been a problem from the beginning. To maintain their distance, Celeste adjusted her stance, but Turkin insisted she move closer. As they started again, Turkin noticed her arms were too stiff and suggested they practice relaxing first. Celeste, confused, asked how. Turkin suddenly pulled her close, catching her off guard and causing her to blush. He instructed her to rest her head against him, arms wrapped around his back, claiming it would help. Celeste felt incredibly awkward, but reminded herself this was just part of Turkin's training. With the upcoming ball looming, she was determined to follow his instructions and avoid any public embarrassment. The musicians began to play again, and Celeste continued to practice dancing with Turkin. He guided her, urging her movements to be natural and comfortable. As they danced, Celeste felt herself improving significantly. Her movements flowed more smoothly, and the steps felt more enjoyable. Excitedly, she complimented Turkin, calling him a wonderful teacher. However, Turkin remained silent, leaving Celeste feeling uneasy. She wondered, was it just her who felt the improvement? She asked him if he still disliked her dancing. Gazing into his eyes, she noticed a flicker of something, but before she could decipher it, Turkin looked away and abruptly stopped dancing. He announced the lesson was over, despite there being ample time remaining. When Celeste insisted on practicing a little longer, Turkin bowed apologetically, claiming he had a pressing matter to attend to. Disappointed, Celeste agreed, and Turkin quickly departed. With the ball fast approaching, Celeste felt she should practice more, but decided to continue another time. Meanwhile, outside, Turkin let out a shaky breath. His cheeks flushed with a disconcerting heat. He was disturbed by his own emotions, unsure why his composure had deserted him so completely. The tightness in his chest made it difficult to breathe, and he realized his thoughts were entirely consumed by Celeste. Later, during Celeste's lesson, the instructor explained the complex usage of titles within the rigid hierarchy of the Eastern Continent's culture. However, Celeste found herself distracted, her gaze drifting towards the window. She noticed a radiant woman, The woman exuded grace and confidence, clearly someone raised with love and care. Noticing Celeste's distraction, the instructor informed her that the woman she was observing was Princess Herodia of the Cronak Kingdom. Celeste jolted, realizing her inattention, and apologized. The instructor reassured her that they had covered the lesson's objectives. However, she found it odd that Princess Herodia, who was still proposing to His Majesty, had also been invited to the ball. Meanwhile, Terega observed Herodia from the window, noting that although the ball was still 4 days away, many distinguished guests had arrived early. Curious about the commotion, Celeste asked Terega to open the window. Terega obliged, and Celeste moved closer, straining to hear Herodia's conversation below. Herodia was speaking with her handmaiden, who appeared worried, urging her to be quiet about something important. Princess Herodia excitedly expressed her joy at being in the same palace as Emperor Betizo, even fantasizing about smelling his cologne and walking the same grounds he had. Her handmaiden was clearly embarrassed, urging her to be more discreet. Celeste and Terega watched Herodia's behavior from the window. When Herodia confidently declared that Betizo was not yet married, only planning to be, Terega erupted in outrage, incredulously shouting at Herodia's audacity. Celeste, however, remained calm, urging Terega not to overreact. Inwardly, she acknowledged that Herodia wasn't entirely wrong. While Betizo was a man of his word, their marriage was, for now, still just a plan. Furthermore, the nobles were likely to favor a princess like Herodia over her. Aware of her precarious position, Celeste reminded herself to remain vigilant. With newfound resolve, Celeste decided to leave. Noticing this, Terega asked where she was going. Celeste replied that she wanted to review her lessons. When Terega reminded her that her lessons for the day were finished, Celeste firmly stated that if she wanted to compete with someone born a princess, she had to work harder. A worried Terega cautioned her against pushing herself too hard, but then wore a look of confusion. She pointed out that everyone in the palace, including Herodia, had been invited. The realization left Celeste speechless, lost in thought. Celeste continued to practice her dancing under Turkin's tutelage. He guided her steps, instructing her to turn and place her feet correctly. Turkin commented that her progress was sufficient to avoid embarrassment, but not yet to the standard of a noble. Celeste, determined to improve, insisted on more practice. Seeing Princess Herodia and realizing that noble women trained from a young age had put pressure on her. Sensing her frustration, Turkin suggested they stop for the day, but Celeste refused, reminding him of the last time he had cut their lesson short. She pouted, suspecting he was looking for an excuse again. Turkin assured her that wasn't the case, though he seemed hesitant, leaving Celeste puzzled by his sudden shift in demeanor. Celeste continued to practice with Turkin, asking him if her dancing was good enough now. Turkin acknowledged her improvement, saying that even if she wasn't yet at his level, she was already one of the best dancers at the ball. Celeste playfully pointed out that he had just admitted she wasn't as good as him, but she thanked him for the compliment nonetheless. Turkin suggested she take a break and offered to fetch her some water. When he returned, he mentioned her encounter with Princess Herodia. Celeste confirmed it, then asked if His Majesty had personally invited Herodia. Turkin explained that Betizo had extended invitations to all esteemed guests. However, Celeste was puzzled, wondering why Betizo would invite Herodia, despite her past proposals to him. She began to suspect a deeper reason behind his decision. Celeste was curious as to why His Majesty would invite Princess Herodia, especially since the ball was meant to introduce her to high society. She wondered if there was something she needed to know. Turkin, understanding her concern, explained that Princess Herodia had proposed to His Majesty multiple times, despite being repeatedly rejected and ignored. His Majesty invited her to finally dissuade her from pursuing him. However, Celeste remained skeptical. She doubted such a plan would work on someone as persistent as Herodia. When Turkin asked if she had met the princess personally, Celeste admitted she had only seen her in passing and overheard people talking about her. Based on her observations, Herodia seemed determined and unlikely to give up easily. Celeste felt a flicker of panic, telling Turkin not to take the matter lightly, as she was serious about it. In response, Turkin calmly suggested that she should speak with Princess Herodia directly. Celeste was taken aback by the idea, hesitant to confront the princess herself. However, Turkin insisted it was best for her to handle the situation herself, to deal with it personally. Celeste pondered his words. She acknowledged that Turkin had guided her well so far, but she couldn't rely on him for everything. At the same time, she didn't have enough confidence to take the initiative. However, if Princess Hirodia provoked her, she was determined to respond accordingly. Later, as Celeste admired the gown she would wear to the ball, she was stunned by its beauty. Even Torrega, standing beside her, gasped, admitting she had never seen such an exquisite dress. Celeste agreed, captivated by the garment's elegance. A maid informed her that the gown wasn't finished yet, but would be ready before the ball. Celeste continued to gaze at the dress, a mixture of excitement and self-doubt swirling within her. The delicate frills and luxurious fabric made her feel as if the gown belonged to someone else. She wondered if she was being too insecure. Suddenly, Torrega yelled for Celeste to come quickly. Startled, Celeste rushed to the window and looked out, only to be completely astonished. She recognized an unexpected person, Aranad. Overjoyed, Celeste dashed out to greet Aranad. Torrega called out in concern, reminding her to be careful, afraid she might trip in her excitement. However, Celeste was too eager to slow down. Aranad was her only true friend in Kaix, after all. He had taught her to read and had been the one to visit her during her darkest hours. Memories of their time together flooded her mind as she ran. Years ago, in the dungeons of Kaix, Celeste had been surprised when Aranad came to see her. She hadn't understood why he, a member of the royal family, would lower himself to visit someone as powerless as her. Yet, Aranad had sincerely expressed his desire to befriend her, admitting his own status as something of an outsider within the Kaix royalty. Celeste, though wary, was intrigued. She noted how different he was from the haughty royals she had encountered. Curiosity piqued, she had asked for his name. He had introduced himself as Aranad Liensa. Finally catching up to him, Celeste couldn't contain her joy and called out his name excitedly. Startled by her voice, Aranad turned around. Meanwhile, in the distance, Turkin watched their reunion silently, his expression unreadable. The moment Celeste saw Aranad, she rushed forward and embraced him tightly, expressing how much she had missed him. Aranad chuckled nervously, slightly flustered, remarking that she still hugged him like this when she was happy. Overwhelmed with excitement, Celeste bombarded him with questions. How did he get here? Was he invited? The journey from Kaix was long. Was he all right? Had it been a difficult trip? Still beaming, Celeste urged Aranad inside to talk. However, realizing how late it was, she hesitated, suggesting they postpone their conversation. Aranad, amused, reassured her that he wasn't tired, but questioned whether it was appropriate to meet so late. Celeste conceded, deciding they would talk tomorrow. As they spoke, Aranad casually mentioned that the journey to Kellanith, though long, had only taken a day thanks to a time mage he'd summoned. Celeste was astonished, but relieved he had arrived safely. She expressed her joy at seeing him again and, in a childish burst of excitement, pumped his hand. Slightly embarrassed, Aranad reminded her that they weren't in the informal setting of the Kaix villa anymore. Realizing her exuberance, Celeste grinned sheepishly, apologized, and suggested they have breakfast together the following morning. When Aranad questioned whether such a thing was permissible, she assured him she would arrange it and send someone to fetch him before the meal. With that settled, Aranad agreed and bid her good night, expressing his happiness at seeing her well. Celeste smiled warmly, telling him to rest well. As Celeste reminisced about her past with Aranad, she recalled how she used to worry about his frequent illnesses. They had been each other's support during difficult times, and she was relieved to see him looking healthy now. Just then, Hirodia approached Celeste, commenting that she seemed busy. Celeste was startled. She turned to see who it was and immediately recognized her. With a polite curtsy, she greeted Princess Hirodia. Meanwhile, Hirodia was also appraising Celeste, recalling the rumors that painted her as an ugly and uncultured fake princess. However, seeing Celeste in person, Hirodia realized she was far more beautiful than she had anticipated. Smaller than she'd expected, too, like a doll. This realization unsettled Hirodia, who hadn't expected a mere imposter princess to pose any threat to her plans. Curiosity getting the better of her, Hirodia asked Celeste directly if she knew who she was. Celeste calmly replied that she had seen her earlier in the office and, captivated by her beauty, had inquired about her identity. Herodia's lips curled into a haughty smile as she admitted to having taken great pains with her appearance for a certain someone. Celeste, maintaining her composure, responded gracefully, acknowledging Herodia's efforts and complimenting her appearance. This unexpected praise that caught Herodia off guard. She instinctively thanked Celeste, but quickly realizing her slip, flustered, she corrected herself. No, thank you. Seeking to steer the conversation to her advantage, Herodia cleared her throat and boldly declared, "Princess, I'm in love with His Majesty. He's the one I want to adorn myself for." Celeste maintained her composure, offering a neutral yet pointed reply. His Majesty is indeed a captivating man. Many women admire him. Inwardly, she noted that Herodia hadn't even attempted to veil her ambition. A smug expression settled on Herodia's face. Unlike these other women, she declared confidently, "I possess royal blood. I shouldn't be compared to commoners." Irritation pricked at Celeste. "I made no comparison," she clarified. "I merely stated that you are one of many women who admire His Majesty." And, she added, a subtle edge to her voice, "The Emperor doesn't care for noble lineage, because he still chose me to be his Empress." At this, Herodia's composure fractured. Her voice rose in frustrated disbelief. "He's been blinded. He'll see the truth soon enough." Celeste's demeanor remained cool. "I caution you against speaking of His Majesty in such a manner." Herodia, realizing her misstep, stammered, unable to formulate a response. A gentle smile touched Celeste's lips. "You must be weary from your journey. Perhaps some rest would do you good." Unwilling to concede, Herodia's eyes welled with tears. "I won't give up," she insisted, her voice thick with emotion, before turning and fleeing in a storm of sobs. Celeste watched her go, pondering Herodia's behavior. For all her seeming sophistication, her words and actions were undeniably immature, almost testing Celeste's patience. Just then, Turkin approached quietly from behind, draping his cloak over her shoulders. "The air is chilly," he murmured, urging her inside. Celeste, startled by his presence, turned to him. "Did you see all of that?" Turkin simply nodded, confirming he had witnessed the exchange. As they walked, Celeste admitted, "I anticipated her persistence, but her behavior still surprised me." Perceptive as always, Turkin observed, "Dealing with Herodia won't be easy. She isn't a princess who cares much for reputation or decorum." Celeste, recalling her interaction with Herodia, conceded, "While I didn't expect such open displays of affection, I can't help but envy her confidence." Herodia's attire, adorned with ribbons and frills, projected an image of someone cherished, someone raised in love. Celeste, however, found such adornments uncomfortable. "Perhaps," she mused, "the frills and ribbons could be removed from my own gowns." Turkin readily agreed. Later, in her chambers, Torrega inquired after Aranad's well-being. Celeste reassured her, "He looks much healthier now, with more color in his cheeks than his usual pallor." Torrega sighed in relief. "I've been so worried about his frail constitution." Celeste looked forward to breakfast the following morning, eager to decide what to ask him first. There was so much she wanted to know. Just then, a maid rushed in, informing Celeste that Princess Herodia had sent a message, inviting her to dine together the following evening. At this news, Celeste's senses sharpened. Torrega, uneasy, remarked on the suddenness of the invitation, given the short time remaining before dinner. Recognizing she had little choice but to confront Herodia, Celeste instructed the maid to confirm her attendance. At dinner the following evening, Herodia remarked, "I considered sending a servant to fetch you, but I appreciate being invited." Celeste, however, politely corrected her. "You extended the invitation, Princess. As hostess, it was my duty to prepare this meal." Clearly irked, Herodia bristled at Celeste's words. "It's hardly appropriate to call yourself hostess before the marriage," she retorted sharply, "especially since a date hasn't even been set. Until then, you cannot claim to be the mistress of Kellanith." Celeste's voice held firm. "The wedding is merely a public declaration. His Majesty has already made his decision. She would be queen," Celeste asserted, demanding to know if Herodia dared defy His Majesty's decree. Flustered, Herodia scrambled to defend herself, claiming she wasn't opposing His Majesty, merely discussing right and wrong. Celeste, however, reminded her that it was His Majesty, not the princess, who decided such matters. Herodia, irritated, gritted her teeth before declaring with renewed confidence that she would be the future queen of Kaix. Celeste, unfazed, took a sip of her drink and listened quietly as Herodia continued, accusing Celeste of shamelessness. A lowborn, false princess, for coveting the position of queen. To allow a woman of impure blood to ascend the throne, Herodia argued, would stain the empire's reputation, diminish its standing, and make it difficult for the people to respect their ruler. Although Celeste initially wanted to dismiss Herodia's words with a laugh, she realized she couldn't ignore them. Calmly and firmly, she retorted that if anyone was shameless, it was Herodia herself. Offended, Herodia denied ever being shameless. Celeste then pointed out Herodia's persistent marriage proposals despite His Majesty's repeated rejections and disregard. Even if there had been some leniency before, Celeste argued it was only because His Majesty hadn't had a fiancée. Now that the situation had changed, Celeste pointed out that speaking in such a manner in front of the person in question was incredibly disrespectful and brought Herodia's character into question. Infuriated and flustered, Herodia loudly defended herself, admitting to being shameless, but insisting she had never harmed Kaix. Celeste, maintaining her composure, looked at Herodia askance and asked if she had harmed Kellanith or His Majesty, Bartizo. She demanded Herodia provide any evidence of the harm she'd caused, emphasizing that Herodia's accusations were mere conjecture. However, Celeste then turned the argument around, questioning Herodia's own actions. She pointed out that despite His Majesty's clear refusal, Herodia persisted with her marriage proposals, creating unnecessary trouble. As a result, the kingdom of Crona had become a laughingstock, the subject of gossip even amongst the common folk. Celeste then asked if Herodia truly believed the news of her repeated proposals had remained solely within Kellanith. Trembling and speechless, Herodia abruptly excused herself from the banquet. Reflecting on the conversation with Herodia, Celeste realized that while the princess had insulted her origins, she hadn't intended to harm her personally. The thought of making more enemies unsettled her. Just then, Turkin arrived, addressing her as princess. Surprised, Celeste asked when he had arrived, to which he replied that he had just gotten there. He mentioned hearing from Toraga that she was having dinner with Princess Herodia, but noted that the dinner seemed to be over. Celeste confirmed this and shared her thoughts with Turkin. She admitted that after seeing Herodia, she realized they both carried the expectations of their respective kingdoms and nobility. To outsiders, Herodia seemed more suited to be queen. Sensing her worry, Turkin reassured Celeste not to fret, reminding her that His Majesty, Bartizo, would keep his promise. However, Celeste insisted that words weren't enough. She needed a concrete, undeniable pledge she could show to others. The next morning, Celeste had breakfast with Aranad. Aranad excitedly praised her, amazed at how much she had learned. Celeste proudly shared that she was now proficient in reading and writing and had learned many new words. Aranad commended her efforts, and she happily added that she was also studying the histories of Kellanith and Kaix, as well as other languages. However, Aranad's attention was suddenly caught by the ring on Celeste's finger, causing his mind to wander. When Celeste noticed, she called his name, and he quickly apologized for his distraction. Concerned, she then asked if he intended to eat so little, and Aranad admitted he hadn't had much of an appetite since morning. Noticing Aranad's pallid complexion, Celeste inquired about his eating habits, urging him to take better care of himself and eat properly. Aranad assured her he ate everything, then asked how Emperor Bartizo was treating her. Celeste responded with enthusiastic affirmation, sharing that Bartizo was even kinder than she had anticipated. She excitedly showed Aranad a ring, explaining that she had seen it in a jewelry shop but hadn't bought it because it was too expensive. However, Bartizo had gifted it to her that very evening. She asked Aranad if he thought it was beautiful. After a moment of silence, Aranad asked her if she was happy. Celeste, momentarily at a loss for words, hesitated before admitting she wasn't entirely sure. Perhaps this was happiness, she mused. Aranad gently reminded her that happiness meant different things to different people, and only she could define her own. Celeste pondered his words, conceding that things felt not bad. Changing the subject, she excitedly asked Aranad if he would attend her wedding, insisting he absolutely had to be there. Aranad agreed, promising he would be there. He consoled himself internally, thinking that as long as Celeste was truly happy, He would be happy too. Just then, Turkin arrived, informing Celeste that it was almost time for her lessons. Celeste expressed surprise at how quickly the time had passed, and Aranad, taking the hint, prepared to leave. Celeste, a little disappointed, confessed she wished they could talk longer, but Aranad reassured her they could meet again. He rose from his seat and bid her farewell. She, in turn, reminded him to take care of his health and waved goodbye. Though she smiled, she couldn't quite mask the awkwardness that lingered beneath the surface. As Aranad departed, Turkin observed that Celeste and he seemed quite close. Celeste admitted that Aranad was her only friend in Kaix, and being with him reminded her of the past. Turkin then asked if she was fond of Aranad, causing Celeste to flinch. He pointed out that in Kellanith, empresses were permitted lovers, but since she wasn't married yet, she needed to be careful. Celeste, flustered, quickly denied any such implication, insisting that Aranad was like a brother to her. Turkin, however, remained skeptical, surmising that Aranad likely saw her as more than just a friend. Celeste clarified that she did care for Aranad, but only as a friend, not romantically. To this, Turkin simply remarked that friendships between men and women, if they lasted, were usually because one loved the other deeply. Celeste insisted that wasn't the case with her and Aranad, and urged Turkin to begin their lesson. However, Turkin abruptly decided to cancel the lesson, pointing out that Celeste had a nosebleed and was pushing herself too hard. Celeste, startled, became flustered. She apologized, admitting she had been overworking herself to keep up with Princess Herodia. Turkin firmly instructed her to rest, warning that she might collapse at the ball. As Celeste sat down, Turkin knelt before her, acknowledging her anxieties, but cautioning that recklessness could ruin all her efforts. He reassured her that she was doing well and urged her to relax. Celeste, smiling, thanked him, though he still suggested they study a little. She reluctantly agreed. On the day of the ball, whispers about Celeste rippled through the attendees. They were eager to see this supposed false princess, having only heard rumors about her. Many doubted her beauty and questioned Emperor Bartizo's choice, despite Kaix's political advantages. Meanwhile, Bartizo himself noticed the murmurs surrounding Celeste. Then, the announcement rang out. Her Royal Highness, Princess Celeste of the Kingdom of Kaix. As Celeste entered the hall, resplendent in a breathtaking gown, the entire room turned towards her. All eyes were on her, and Bartizo, upon seeing her, was utterly stunned. Murmurs rippled through the guests as Celeste made her entrance. Many were struck by her beauty, realizing the rumors of her being a false princess might have been exaggerated. Some noted how attentively the Emperor of Kaix had looked after her. Celeste felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. Recalling Turkin's advice to maintain her composure, Celeste managed a small smile as Emperor Bartizo extended his hand. "Welcome, Your Highness," Bartizo greeted. "Has some magic occurred while I wasn't looking? I almost mistook you for someone else." Celeste placed her hand in his, a smile playing on her lips. "I'll take that as a compliment." Bartizo chuckled, a gleam in his eye, confirming that it was indeed intended as such. He noted the opposing nobles, the ones who likely planned to spread rumors about Celeste, now struggling to conceal their astonishment. Their plans had backfired spectacularly. Celeste was impressed by Bartizo's ability to read the room so swiftly. Their scheme had completely blown up in their faces. Celeste was impressed by Bartizo's quick grasp of the situation. He reminded her to remain vigilant and promised a gift after the ball. Then, he extended his hand, inviting her to dance. As they moved across the floor, Bartizo inquired if she had any dance training. Celeste admitted to a little practice, and Bartizo praised her skill, attributing it to Turkin's tutelage. Celeste felt a wave of relief. All that effort had paid off. As they danced, Bartizo marveled at the extent of Celeste's transformation. Holding her delicate hand, he teased, "Can you still hold a pen?" Celeste replied with confidence, "I can do anything," reminding him that he had already witnessed her skill with a knife. Meanwhile, Princess Herodia watched them from afar, her jealousy and anger simmering as she observed Celeste dancing gracefully with Bartizo. Celeste and Bartizo continued their conversation as they sat together. She brought up the gift he had mentioned earlier, asking if he had decided on something. However, she wasn't seeking a material present. Hesitating slightly, she expressed her desire for something different. Intrigued by her request, Bartizo poured her a glass of wine and asked what she desired. Celeste, playing coy, told him she would reveal her wish after the ball, leaving Bartizo's curiosity piqued. Before they could continue, Princess Herodia approached, curtsying formally to Bartizo and thanking him for the invitation. However, Bartizo's response took her aback. He questioned her sincerity, bluntly asking her to cease sending him marriage proposals. The unexpected rebuke visibly shook Herodia. In a moment of indignant anger, she raised her voice in protest. Unfazed by her reaction, Bartizo gently drew Celeste closer, making his position clear. Herodia struggled to comprehend his words, questioning his actions, her shock evident. Bartizo remained impassive, mentioning the numerous letters he received daily and how hers were becoming an unnecessary burden. He went so far as to imply that any further correspondence would likely be discarded. Deeply wounded by his words, Herodia couldn't contain her emotions and fled the hall in tears. The guests, witnessing the scene, began to murmur amongst themselves, shocked by what had just transpired. Many recognized the rejected princess and whispered about her public humiliation. Meanwhile, Celeste observed the situation with mixed feelings. While she held no affection for Herodia, she was still unsettled by the turn of events. In her mind, she wished Bartizo had handled the matter privately, rather than making such a spectacle. Finally back in her own room after the ball, Celeste collapsed onto her bed, releasing a long sigh. It was over. Exhaustion washed over her as she considered how much effort Turkin had put into training her in such a short time. She pondered how to repay him, perhaps with a gift. Just then, Turkin entered the room. He looked relieved to find her still awake. However, he hadn't come for pleasantries. He brought urgent news. The Emperor requested Celeste's immediate presence in the audience chamber. Celeste, surprised by the summons so soon after the ball, hadn't expected to see him again so quickly. Moments later, she stood before Bartizo. He admitted to considering postponing their conversation until the following day, but his curiosity wouldn't allow him to sleep until he knew what Celeste desired as a reward. Before answering, Celeste hesitated, questioning whether her performance at the ball had met his expectations. Bartizo showed little interest in pleasantries, reminding her that the purpose of this meeting was to hear her request. Without hesitation, Celeste declared her desire for a betrothal ceremony. Bartizo burst into laughter at her unexpected request, inquiring as to her reasoning. Celeste explained that with the wedding still so far off, she desired something to solidify their agreement, rather than simply waiting. Her words led Bartizo to question whether she distrusted his promise, but Celeste reassured him that she believed him. She simply needed a testament to his commitment. Bartizo considered her words, maintaining his composure, and told her not to worry. Celeste was taken aback by his response, wondering what he might say next. But Bartizo acknowledged Celeste's efforts at the ball, stating that she had done well and that he intended to honor his promise and grant her request. Hearing this, Celeste expressed her gratitude. Relieved that he had agreed so readily, she was glad she had decided to come. Bartizo then inquired whether she preferred a grand betrothal ceremony, like the ball, or a private one. Slightly flustered, Celeste opted for a private ceremony and asked him to decide the date. Bartizo agreed and suggested consulting with Turkin on the matter, to which Celeste readily assented. Out of curiosity, he then asked if she liked the ring. Celeste replied enthusiastically that she truly did. Bartizo smiled in satisfaction, rising to his feet and declaring their conversation at an end. As he prepared to leave, Celeste offered to escort him, but he stopped her, insisting she remain. She respected his words, bidding him good night as he departed. As he walked away, Celeste noticed he seemed to be in particularly good spirits, perhaps due to the success of the ball. Meanwhile, Bartizo paused, lost momentarily in his own thoughts. He questioned why he had come to see her so late, something he had never done before. He hadn't been offended by her request for proof of his commitment, finding himself instead intrigued by her actions. He wondered if he had changed, or if Celeste was the catalyst for this shift. Having settled on the betrothal ceremony, Bartizo informed Turkin that Celeste preferred a smaller affair. Turkin acknowledged the request, assuring him that the necessary preparations would be made. Noting the late hour, he offered to warm some tea, but Bartizo, feeling unusually relaxed, declined, stating he could sleep without it. Later, Bartizo presented Celeste with another ring. She hesitated before accepting, overwhelmed by receiving another piece of jewelry so soon. While grateful for the gesture, she nervously pointed out that her jewelry box was already full and worried that he was spending too much on her. Bartizo reassured her that his finances were quite healthy. When she insisted that she had too many rings already, he nonchalantly remarked that he could always buy her a larger jewelry box. Celeste attempted to refuse, stating that she was content with what she had and didn't want him buying more just for her. What Bartizo said next took her by surprise. He hadn't bought the ring at all. He claimed to have found it somewhere, already wrapped, implying its original owner must have been in a hurry. When Celeste suggested they try to return it, he dismissed the concern, reasoning that if someone could afford such a ring, they likely wouldn't mind losing it. With that, he simply urged her to wear it. Celeste hesitated to accept the expensive ring, uneasy about taking something that might belong to someone else. But Bartizo, clearly irritated, insisted it was fine. But when Celeste continued to express her unease, he suddenly erupted in anger, leaving her startled and dismayed. He ordered a servant to throw the ring away. Celeste was stunned by his reaction, immediately protesting and questioning why he would discard such a valuable item. But Bartizo retorted that unclaimed items should be disposed of. Celeste, however, argued that the ring was clearly an expensive piece belonging to someone, likely Louisa, and it would be best to at least attempt to locate its rightful owner. Though irritated, Bartizo conceded, agreeing to hold onto the ring before deciding its fate. His frustration, however, was palpable as he sat down to eat. An awkward silence hung between them. Celeste noticed Bartizo barely touched his food. Hesitantly, she pointed out, suggesting he should at least eat a little, lest he harm himself. Bartizo, still agitated, brushed off her concern, remarking that even Turkin constantly nagged him about his eating habits, and now Celeste was doing the same. Realizing she might have overstepped, Celeste quickly apologized, saying she hadn't meant to intrude and would be more mindful in the future. Her expression turned somber as she lowered her head. Seeing her reaction, Bartizo hesitated, then told her he didn't actually mind. Celeste, confused, asked him what he meant. He struggled to articulate himself, clumsily admitting that if she wished, she could continue to nag him. Surprised by his unexpected words, Celeste agreed with a small smile, her gaze fixed on him. She realized the icy, distant dynamic they once shared had begun to shift. For the first time, she sensed a flicker of warmth between them, something she never anticipated for Bartizo. Later, Bartizo found himself awash in confusion and frustration. He confessed to Turkin that he felt like he was going mad, questioning why he had lied to and yelled at Celeste earlier. Turkin casually pointed out that Bartizo had given Celeste another ring at dinner, and suggested he should first consider why he kept giving her gifts. Bartizo fell into contemplation, reflecting on his actions. He realized he enjoyed seeing Celeste happy. Her smile was something he found beautiful. Noticing his reaction, Turkin remarked that Bartizo had likely grown attached to the princess. The thought unsettled Bartizo, who pondered the strange feelings he was experiencing. Every time he heard her laughter, despite their similar backgrounds and past struggles, Celeste seemed so different from him. It was as if she carried no burdens, and each time she smiled, an unfamiliar warmth washed over him, leaving him bewildered. He wondered if this feeling stemmed from the fact he had been alone for so long, or simply because he hadn't had a companion in his bed lately. Unsure, yet intrigued by the notion, he instructed Turkin to summon Celeste. Just before Turkin departed, Bartizo issued another command. He wanted the princess to begin training in something. He didn't specify. Turkin, taken aback, nonetheless accepted the order and left. Celeste, surrounded by stacks of books, stretched after finishing her reading, complaining of tired eyes. She decided to step outside for some fresh air. As she walked, she contemplated her goals. Being betrothed to Bartizo wasn't enough. She needed to cultivate an air of nobility that surpassed even Herodias. Resolute, she determined to continue her studies with renewed vigor the following day. Just then, she heard a voice from upstairs. Curiosity piqued, she decided to investigate. Upon arriving, she was surprised to find Turkin standing there alone. Startled, she called out to him, asking how he'd gotten there. Turkin, in turn, questioned her presence. Celeste explained she had come out for some air, but she was certain she had heard voices. Turkin, however, dismissed her concerns, insisting he was the only one there. Celeste, though suspicious, couldn't substantiate anything and wondered if she had simply imagined it. Turkin then asked Celeste if she liked the ring. She replied that she appreciated everything bestowed upon her by His Majesty. He then inquired whether she liked the ring itself, or simply because it was a gift from Bartizo. Celeste found the question odd, but reiterated that it was special because it came from him. Turkin then insinuated that Bartizo's feelings towards her were changing. Celeste considered this a positive development, believing it was better for her future husband to show interest rather than indifference. However, Turkin countered, asking what if Bartizo's feelings weren't reciprocated. This gave Celeste pause, realizing she hadn't considered that possibility before. Turkin warned her that Bartizo wasn't a man who would cater to her expectations. Celeste felt a pang of sadness, recalling how she had started to believe their relationship was progressing simply because Bartizo had been kinder to her. Noticing her distress, Turkin draped a cloak over her shoulders, then moved unsettlingly close. He delivered a startling announcement. He'd been instructed to tutor her on her wedding night. Celeste was stunned by his words. Celeste was shocked when Turkin mentioned the wedding night, as they hadn't even set a date. He clarified, stating he was referring to premarital guidance for her upcoming betrothal. This news left Celeste dumbfounded, as she had assumed the betrothal was a formality, not requiring an intimate consummation. She questioned why she needed to be instructed in such matters, to which Turkin bluntly replied that while Bartizo was experienced, she was not. Celeste found it unbelievable. If such things were expected, was this truly a marriage of convenience? Turkin told her she could confirm it herself. Celeste felt a wave of frustration and humiliation wash over her, suspecting Bartizo was doing this solely for his own gratification, without regard for her feelings. She defiantly asked Turkin what she should do first, implying it didn't matter whether it was there or in the bedroom. As she tried to compose herself, Turkin stepped closer, asking if she was truly all right with this. Caught off guard, Celeste hesitantly agreed. Turkin then instructed her to close her eyes. Confused, yet overwhelmed, Celeste complied. In the next moment, he kissed her. Her heart pounded, her cheeks flushed, a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't control. After kissing Celeste, Turkin told her that would be all for today, and they would go further next time. Flustered, Celeste excused herself hurriedly, trying to hide her burning face. As she ran, she couldn't help but reflect on how different reality was from what she had only read about in books. The next day, in the tea room, Elisabetta noticed Celeste's distracted expression. She asked if anything was wrong. Still reeling from recent events, Celeste denied it, claiming she was just tired. Elisabetta remarked that being cooped up in the palace must be tiring. She suggested Celeste should venture outside the imperial city for some real fresh air. She even invited Celeste to spend the night with her. That evening, Celeste found herself at a house on Guido Street, having dinner with Elisabetta's father, Count Guido. The Count warmly welcomed Celeste, telling her to make herself at home and ask for anything she needed. Celeste politely replied that it was she who was grateful for the esteemed Guido family's invitation. During dinner, the Countess asked Celeste to persuade Elisabetta to change her hairstyle, pointing out that she was the only lady in Kellanith who styled her hair that way. Celeste smiled, expressing her admiration for Elisabetta's individuality, saying her unique style made her appear confident. However, the Countess insisted that Elisabetta should be brimming with confidence even without a distinctive hairstyle. Elisabetta grumbled in frustration, complaining that even after the princess approved of her choice, her mother continued to criticize. Watching their interaction, Celeste pondered Elisabetta's family dynamic. She had expected a certain stiffness, a formality born of their noble status. But instead, Count Guido and the Countess were warm and lively. Watching their interaction, Celeste pondered Elisabetta's family dynamic, wondering if such easy affection could ever be a part of her own life. After a delightful dinner, Celeste expressed her joy at finally sharing a meal with Elisabetta after so long. Elisabetta, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, remarked that she hadn't expected Bartizo to allow Celeste out and asked if Turkin had given her any trouble. Celeste admitted that while he hadn't complained overly much, he had cautioned her to be careful. The mention of Turkin's name brought a rush of heat to her cheeks as the memory of the previous night's kiss surfaced unbidden. Elisabetta, noticing the blush, asked with concern if Celeste felt unwell. Flustered, Celeste quickly denied it, an awkward laugh escaping her lips as she assured Elisabetta she was fine. Seeing Celeste's relief, Elisabetta brightened, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "There's somewhere special I want to take you," she declared. When Celeste hesitantly questioned the propriety of venturing out so late, Elisabetta revealed her plan, a masked ball. And so, Celeste and Elisabetta arrived at the venue, the muffled sounds of music and laughter spilling out into the night. A flicker of nervousness touched Celeste. This felt dangerous. Elisabetta, sensing her apprehension, reassured her, explaining that it was a private, members-only establishment, impenetrable to outsiders. She also informed Celeste that they would need to use aliases, introducing herself as Valerie. Celeste, after a moment of hesitation, chose the name Alicia. As they stepped inside, Elisabetta, her excitement palpable, urged Celeste to embrace the experience. "Let's have some real fun," she exclaimed. Celeste gazed around in wonder, taking in the grandeur of the scene. Elisabetta explained that the masked ball was intended to recreate the lavish festivities of fairy tale balls. She added that most attendees were nobility and the wealthy, seeking a taste of freedom or simply the thrill of the experience. Taking a deep breath, Elisabetta reveled in the anonymity the mask afforded her. "You have to try this, Celeste. It's liberating," she declared. Observing the calm, elegant atmosphere, Celeste felt reassured that the place wasn't dangerous after all. Wanting Elisabetta to fully enjoy herself, she encouraged her friend to explore freely. Elisabetta, checking that Celeste would be all right alone, received assurances and then, with a playful wink, flitted off, already adapting to her alias of Valerie. With Elisabetta gone, Celeste took the opportunity to observe her surroundings more closely. She noticed exotic wines and a particularly unusual-looking fruit, wondering if she should try some. Just then, a man approached her, commenting on the fruit and its perfect pairing with a specific wine.